My daughter's name is Emani Dior. She's 4, and her name means beautiful face in Swahili. You know, but
That one line hits different when you know what happened after it. Nipsey Hustle wasn't just talking about a name. He was talking about his firstborn daughter, Emani Asghedom, a child whose name he said meant beautiful faith, and whose life would eventually become tied to one of the most painful legacies in hip-hop. Emani was born in November 2008, years before the world fully understood what Nipsey was building, and years before tragedy would turn her childhood into a public conversation. Because here's the part that makes this story so heavy. Emani didn't just lose a father. She lost a father who'd become a symbol, a community leader, a businessman, a Grammy-nominated artist, and the face of a movement that was bigger than music. Nipsey was killed on the 31st of March 2019, when Emani was only 10 years old. And from that moment forward, her private grief became connected to headlines, courtrooms, estate documents, family decisions, and the expectations of an entire culture. So this story is not just about money. It is not just about custody. It is not just about who raised her after Nipsey passed. This is about what happens when a child inherits a legacy before she even gets the chance to fully understand the weight of it.
in jail, I didn't know if I was gonna get out, and I had a child on the way. So I just, it was a lot on my mind, and I think that faith represented where I was at, you know what I'm saying? And it was beautiful because I ended up getting out of that situation and moving forward, but...
Now, before we go any further, we have to slow this down and really look at the full picture, because Emani's story is one of those situations where people online see one headline, one photo, one court update, or one viral post, and they think they understand everything. But they don't. Not even close. This is a story that starts with a father who came from South Los Angeles and turned survival into strategy. It moves through a murder case that shook the entire music industry. Then it turns into a custody fight that lasted for years, an estate worth millions, and a teenage girl trying to grow up while carrying a last name that means something to everybody around her. And that is where the pressure begins. Because being Nipsey Hussle's daughter is not a normal celebrity kid situation. It is not just red carpets, inheritance, and famous family connections. This is different. This is a child connected to Crenshaw, to the Marathon brand, to a father whose death became a community wound, and to a legacy people still protect. Like it happened yesterday, so today, we're not doing surface-level gossip. We're breaking down the timeline, the custody battle, the estate, the family structure, and why so many people still worry about what Emani has had to carry behind the scenes.
What do you think are the keys to building wealth?
To own something is very important. To understand investment, to understand living within your means or under your means, to understand how to make something. That's what's been critical for me, is I make something.
To understand Emani's situation, you first have to understand who her father was and why his death left such a massive hole. Nipsey Hustle, born Emani Asghedom, was never just another rapper from Los Angeles. His official music site lists Victory Lap as a February 2018 release, with a Grammy nomination for Best Rap Album. But the music was only one part of what made him different. Nipsey built his image around ownership, independence, and reinvestment. GQ described how he opened the Marathon clothing in the same strip mall where he had once hustled mixtapes, later buying the strip and using his success to pour resources back into South LA. That detail matters, because it explains why people didn't just mourn him like an artist, they mourned him like a builder. And then, on the 31st of March 2019, everything stopped. AP reported that Eric R. Holder Jr. was later sentenced to 60 years to life after being convicted in Nipsey's murder outside the Marathon store in South Los Angeles. The case wasn't just another celebrity tragedy, it was a neighborhood trauma, because Nipsey was killed in the same place he'd been trying to transform. So when people talk about Emani growing up without him, they're not just talking about a daughter losing her dad. They're talking about a child losing the one person who understood exactly how to guide her through the world attached to his name. Emani Asghedom came into the world in November 2008. Long before Nipsey reached the level of fame people remember him for now. At that time, he was still building, still grinding, still fighting to turn his independent movement into something real. But fatherhood clearly changed something in him. In a 2018 conversation with Stephen Curry, Nipsey talked about having children as one of the most important things he had done. explaining that shaping human beings meant more than just music accomplishments. And the stories about Emani and Nipsey are not just photo op stories. People reported that he used to have daily talks with her before school, teaching her ideas like integrity, leadership, confidence, and thinking for herself. That says a lot about the kind of father he was trying to be. He wasn't only trying to leave money, he was trying to leave principles. That is what makes this whole situation so emotional. Because Emani got to know the real Nipsey, not just the mural, not just the tribute videos, not just the image fans hold on to now. She knew the man who drove her to school, spoke life into her, and tried to plant values in her before the world became loud. So when he was taken, she didn't just lose protection, she lost direction. And for a child growing up around fame, grief, money, and public pressure, direction is everything. When Nipsey was killed, the whole world reacted like something bigger than music had been taken. Tributes came from every direction. His memorial was held at the Staples Center, and former President Barack Obama even sent a letter praising Nipsey's commitment to his community. Axios reported that Obama described Nipsey as someone who saw hope and worked for South Los Angeles, even though they had never personally met. But while the public was celebrating his legacy, Emani was living the part nobody could fully see. She was only 10 years old. She had to watch the world grieve her father out loud while she was still trying to understand what had happened privately. People could post murals, tributes, speeches, and marathon hashtags, but none of that could replace the person she actually lost. And this is where the story starts to shift from tragedy into something even more complicated. Because after Nipsey's death, the question became, who would raise Emani? Who would protect her? Who would make the decisions? And how do you raise the child of a murdered icon when money, grief, family loyalty, and public attention are all in the room at the same time? That question did not stay private for long. It moved straight into court. After Nipsey's death, Emani's guardianship became one of the most emotional legal issues surrounding his family. Reports say Nipsey's mother and siblings were appointed legal guardians after he was killed, while Emani's mother, Tanisha Foster, later fought to regain a larger role in her daughter's life. Now this is where the story gets delicate, because both sides were dealing with something painful. Nipsey's family believed they were protecting his daughter and keeping her connected to the stability she had known around his side of the family. Tanisha, on the other hand, argued that she was still Emani's mother and that the guardianship arrangement should not permanently separate them. According to reporting on the legal filings, Tanisha said she had initially agreed to the guardianship because of financial struggles and because she believed it was in Emani's best interest at that time. But later, she claimed the arrangement had gone too far and that her access to her daughter had become restricted. And that is what makes this chapter so hard to watch. This wasn't just a paperwork fight. It was a child sitting in the middle of grief, family loyalty, money, and a mother trying to reclaim her place. Every court update became another reminder that Nipsey's death did not end the pain. It only changed the form of it. For this short section, keep the delivery tight and emotional. In Tanisha's filings, the message was simple but heavy. She wanted the court to understand that this was not just about control, it was about motherhood. She argued that Emani wanted to live with her, that the original guardianship had served its purpose, and that the court needed to recognize her role as Emani's mother again. Reports on the filings said Tanisha described her daughter asking when they would be able to live together. And when you hear that, you understand why this situation hit people so hard. Because on one side, you have Nipsey's family trying to protect the daughter of the man they lost. On the other side, you have a mother saying, "That is still my child." And in the middle, you have Emani, growing up while adults, courts, and the internet all talk about her future. That is the kind of pressure no child asks for. Then, in March 2025, after years of tension, the custody situation finally shifted in a major way. The blast reported that Tanisha Foster was granted joint physical and legal custody of Emani after reaching a deal with Nipsey's family. Under that arrangement, Tanisha and Nipsey's brother Samuel, Black Sam Asghedom, would share decision-making rights, with Emani spending 60% of her time with her mother and the rest with her uncle. That update was bigger than people realized, because it meant the case did not end with one side completely winning and the other side completely losing. It ended with a structure where Emani could remain connected to both parts of her family. Nipsey's mother and sister stepped down from their co-guardian roles, while Black Sam remained involved on the family side. But here's the part that people miss. A custody agreement can settle a legal fight, but it cannot erase the years that came before it. Emani had already spent most of her teenage life inside a situation shaped by loss, guardianship, public debate, and divided households. So yes, the March 2025 agreement was progress. It gave structure. It gave Tanisha formal rights. It kept Sam involved. But emotionally, that does not mean the story is suddenly healed. It only means Emani finally had a clearer path after years of uncertainty. Now, let's talk about the money, because this is where a lot of people misunderstand Emani's story. In November 2023, people reported that Nipsey Hussle's estate had been settled, and that his two children, Emani and Cross, were the sole beneficiaries. Each child was set to receive 50% of the estate's assets. That sounds like security, and financially, it is. But money does not automatically create peace. It does not bring back a father. It does not remove childhood trauma. And it definitely does not stop the public from watching every move a celebrity child makes. The estate also matters because Nipsey's legacy was not just cash sitting in an account. It was connected to businesses, music, trademarks, and the Marathon brand. People reported that Lauren London would receive 50% of cash and non-cash assets on behalf of Cross, while Samuel Asghedom and Nipsey's family were awarded the other half on Emani's behalf. And outside the estate, the Marathon legacy kept expanding. In 2024, Earn Your Leisure partnered with Microsoft and the Marathon for a $100,000 Nipsey Hustle business grant, continuing the same entrepreneurship mission Nipsey was known for. So Emani is not growing up around a legacy that faded. She's growing up around one that keeps getting bigger, and that can be a blessing, but it can also feel like a weight. By the time Emani reached her later teenage years, the public had already watched pieces of her life through memorials, award shows, court updates, and family appearances. People reported that she helped honor Nipsey's legacy publicly, including being among family members who accepted a posthumous Grammy on his behalf and attending moments tied to his Hollywood Walk of Fame honor. That is not a normal childhood. Most teenagers get to figure themselves out quietly. Emani has had to do it with a famous last name, a murdered father, an inheritance story, and an entire hip-hop community emotionally invested in who she becomes. And that is why every public appearance hits people so deeply. Fans don't just see Emani. They see Nipsey's face, his energy, his unfinished mission. They see the little girl who once stood beside him now, growing into her own person. And for people who love Nipsey, that is emotional. But for Emani, it may also be complicated, because at some point she has to be allowed to be more than Nipsey Hussle's daughter. She has to be allowed to become Emani Asghedom, with her own identity, her own choices, and her own future. That is the quiet tension in this whole story. The world wants her to carry the marathon, but she is still a young woman trying to carry herself. Now this is the part where the conversation has to be handled carefully. There are people online who talk about Emani's life like they know exactly what is happening behind closed doors. They don't. There is no reliable public proof that should be used to label her or accuse her of anything. But what can be talked about is the pressure around her environment, her last name, and the world her father came from. Nipsey's own story was tied to South Los Angeles, to street politics, to ownership, to transformation, and to the complicated reality of trying to uplift the same neighborhood that shaped him. GQ described how his imprint remained visible across South LA, from murals to businesses to community projects, because he was deeply committed to changing the place he came from. And that is the part that makes Emani's situation so heavy. She is connected to a legacy that was born in a real neighborhood, not a Hollywood fantasy. Her father did not just rap about struggle, he tried to build a way out of it. So when fans express concern, the safest way to understand it is not as an accusation against Emani. It is a fear that the same pressures Nipsey fought against might still exist around the people he left behind. That is the real story. Not gossip, not blame, just the painful reality that legacy can protect you. It can also place you under a microscope. Being Nipsey Hussle's daughter means Emani carries more than a famous surname. She carries a symbol. And in a city like Los Angeles, symbols can become heavy. After Nipsey's death, murals appeared, tributes continued, and his presence remained visible across South LA. GQ wrote that his image could be found throughout the community after his passing, and that his loss was felt not only by fans but by people who saw him as a father, son, brother, lover, and friend. That matters, because Emani is not growing up next to a quiet legacy. She is growing up next to a loud one, a living one, a legacy people still defend, still celebrate, and still grieve. The Hollywood Walk of Fame honored Nipsey with a posthumous star on the 15th of August 2022, his birthday, placing his name permanently into entertainment history. But for his children, honors like that are not just achievements. They are reminders. Every award, every tribute, every mural says the same thing. Your father mattered to millions. And that kind of love can be beautiful. But it can also create pressure. Because when everybody sees your father as a legend, people start expecting you to live in a way that protects that legend. That is why Emani's story feels so sensitive. She is not just growing up. She is growing up under a legacy people refuse to let die. At its core, Emani's story is bigger than one family. It speaks to what happens when violence takes a parent and leaves children to grow up inside the aftermath. Nipsey's murder ended one life, but it also changed the lives of his children forever. AP reported that his killer received 60 years to life, but no sentence can restore what Emani and Cross lost. And that is why this story connects so deeply with the culture. People know the phrase, "The marathon continues." But for Nipsey's children, that phrase is not just a slogan, it is their reality. They are the ones who have to continue living after the cameras leave, after the memorial ends, after the hashtag stop trending. Nipsey spent his final years proving that ownership, discipline, community, and vision could change a person's path. He opened businesses, supported community projects, and showed that success did not have to mean abandoning the neighborhood. GQ highlighted his commitment to shaping his community, including the Marathon Clothing and Vector 90, a co-working and STEM-focused space for inner-city youth. But the hardest part is this: the people who inherit a legacy also inherit the responsibility attached to it. And Emani inherited that responsibility before she was even old enough to understand all the pieces. That is what makes her story so emotional. She is not just living after Nipsey. She is living through what he left behind. One thing has to be said clearly. Emani does not just need money around her. She needs guidance, privacy, consistency, and people who see her as a person, not just as the extension of a legend. The estate may be worth millions, and the family may have legal structures in place, but growing up after trauma requires more than paperwork. Nipsey seemed to understand that deeply when he was alive. The school conversations he had with Emani were not random. They were intentional. He was teaching her to think for herself, to believe in herself, to understand integrity, and to know the difference between following and leading. People reported that he repeated those conversations with her because he wanted her to remember what he believed was important. That is the part that hits hardest now. The very lessons he was planting are the lessons she has to carry without him physically there. So, when people ask what Emani needs next, the answer cannot only be her inheritance. It cannot only be the Marathon brand. It cannot only be family protection. She needs room to become herself. She needs adults who protect her from pressure, not just from danger. She needs a life where Nipsey's legacy is a foundation, not a cage. Because the real victory is not just preserving Nipsey's name. The real victory is making sure his daughter gets to grow into her own. So when you look at Emani Asghedom story, it does not have a clean ending yet. And maybe that is what makes it so important. She is still young. She is still growing. She is still figuring out what her life is supposed to look like. After losing a father, the world refuses to forget. She has access to resources most people will never have. She has a family legacy that still moves through music, business, community work, and public memory. She has a name that opens doors. But she also has pain that money cannot erase and expectations that no teenager should have to carry alone. Nipsey Hustle left behind more than songs. He left behind children, he left behind lessons, he left behind a community blueprint. And he left behind the question that still hangs over everything. Can the marathon continue in a way that protects the people he loved most? For Emani, the answer is still being written. Not in court filings, not in internet comments, not in gossip headlines. It is being written in the choices she makes, the guidance she receives, and the space she is given to become her own woman. And that is why this story matters. Because the culture does not just want to remember Nipsey. The culture wants to see his children be okay. Drop your thoughts below, because this one is deeper than celebrity news. This is family, legacy, grief, and the real cost of carrying a name everybody knows.